Hey everybody, this is First Warn Storm Team Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich. What a difference a day makes. Some big changes to the track of Joaquin, but not a lot of big changes to the impacts. We talked a lot about this yesterday. Even if you take Joaquin out of the equation, which partly that's happening, we're still in store for a big flood threat. So it seems odd that I have good news, bad news. Good news, Joaquin, less of a threat to the Carolinas. Bad news, we could still end up getting a lot of rain, maybe even more rain because of the way this is going to set up. Let me explain how this unfolds because it's a really complicated setup. First things first, you see all the things shaded in green, flash flood watch or just plain old flood watches, includes most of North Carolina, low country of South Carolina, several coastal flood advisories as well. These extend up the East Coast all the way to Long Island and up into the Northeast. The flood threat is not going away, even if maybe for a hint of a moment it looks like the threat from Joaquin is going to move away. Temperatures across our area right now are in the 60s. It's definitely a much cooler day. Not going to focus on temperatures too much. We'll focus on Joaquin, which is now a Category 3, but if you look closely, we've got an eye wall that's forming over the Bahamas. It could be a Category 4, and you can see it's forecast to be a Category 4 later today, and then make that turn to the north. What happened overnight, and really last night's model run, there was a shift in the track back towards the east offshore. Just offshore and maybe making landfall in the northeast, but I think that trend could continue as we're seeing some interesting things unfold in some of the data. So here's the track from the Hurricane Center. I overlaid the wind fields probabilities. You can see there's definitely a shift to the right or to the east with this system as it's expected to stay further offshore. Now let me show you really quickly. As my phone goes off, obviously, I'll show you real quickly some of the model data just to show you how the models have been changing quite a bit overnight as well. You could see all the guidance here starting to shift further offshore. Remember yesterday I showed you a lot of the guidance was in North Carolina. There's still some going there, but there's been a huge jump into this track, the consensus track, back kind of a little S-curve like this. That's just another system invest we're not worried about, but you could see that little S-curve. That's interesting, but what's interesting on top of all this is this likely is not going to have a big impact on our rain totals, and you're probably saying, how is that possible? Let me show you the 5-day rainfall forecast across the area. Look at the rainfall totals. This is with Joaquin staying offshore, mind you. You can see the 7 to 10 inch rainfall rates over the next 5 days still in the forecast. If you're looking at Joaquin impacts, it's probably more up in here. This is because of an upper low, and that upper low is starting to develop. Look what's going on here across the southeast. You can clearly see Joaquin. Here's Joaquin, but this upper low, this is the big player that's going to cause issue. Joaquin's going to stay off the coast. Some of it moisture gets entrained here, but there's a big fetch of moisture on the outside of this upper low that gets wrapped around, and that upper low is going to spin up and kind of sit here over the southeast. So let me show you how that unfolds in the model data, because it's very fascinating meteorologically what's going to happen here. I'll back this up a little bit. I think I jumped ahead a couple frames here. What I'm going to show you here is the future radar from the GFS model and the 500 millibar charts. That's the upper level charts. That's what these kind of brown lines are. You see the upper low there. There is Joaquin. Watch what happens as this kind of cuts off, we call it, and starts to spin to the southeast. It ends up grabbing Joaquin and kind of kicking it out to sea, but at the same time, it's grabbing some of that tropical moisture associated with Joaquin and from the Gulf of Mexico, and it's wrapping it up into the upper low. So the upper low is sitting here. Look at these rain bands that form in that band of heavy moisture along the coast and starts to shift backward. And you see that heavy rain band moving over the Piedmont of the Carolinas, including the Charlotte area. There's our upper low cutting off there. So you've got two little areas of low pressure, upper level low pressure and surface low pressure associated with Joaquin. And it's going to do something called the Fujiwara effect. This is something when you have two areas of low pressure, they wobble around each other. They actually orbit around each other briefly. And you'll see this when I loop this as the hurricane moves off the coast. The upper low begins to develop and crank up, and look at these rain bands that are forming over the Carolinas. There's your upper low, there's your hurricane right there, and you can see they're kind of dancing around each other. That's what we call the Fujiwara effect. See how they're kind of rotating around each other? And this happens briefly, and this little pivot action is going to cause heavy rain to move into the Carolinas. Look at the heavy rain over us, even though the hurricane is way, way, way offshore. And this is why the European model yesterday, even though it had this solution of the storm offshore, was still producing a lot of rain over the Carolinas. In fact, it had like 15 inches of rain over Charlotte, while the GFS had the storm plowing into the Carolinas and actually only gave us 4 or 5 inches. That's because even though the hurricane would move over us, you'd think that's a lot of rain. This setup here actually produces a heavy deformation zone, we call it, or a heavy rain band. It's what we see in the wintertime with big winter storms on the coast. It's usually snow. In this case, it's going to be very, very heavy rain. And watch this unfold. That heavy rain band pivots down through South Carolina through the weekend and then may come back north as the hurricane moves up the coast. So there you go. There's the hurricane. There's the upper low, and you see how they kind of rotated around each other? Let me rotate this back and forth a couple times, and you see that little Fujiwara effect. See that dancing motion as they kind of orbit around each other, like one is the sun and one is a planet? So that's what's going on. And then watch what happens with Joaquin. Because the upper low moves over the coast and gets down here, now Joaquin has an escape plan. It has a way to get out and away from the coast. So even for folks in the Northeast, though, I wouldn't let my guard down at all with this system. Because of this setup, it looks like it might escape to the Northeast and miss the United States altogether. But what's not going to miss us is the heavy, heavy, heavy rain. And again, let me reiterate this. Without Joaquin even hitting the Carolinas, we could get 7 to 10 inches of rain, and the upper low could still cause winds between 20 and 30 miles an hour. So as of right now, wind threat has gone down, hurricane threat's gone down, but the flash flooding, flood threat has actually increased, and the threat for trees and power lines is still there for those to go down because of the wet weather and just some gusty winds between 20 and 30 miles an hour. This wind damage that we see isn't going to be structural damage. It isn't going to be like hurricane wind damage. It's more of a windy fall storm that causes trees to come down because of the heavy rain. So I know it's a lot to take in, a lot going on, but this graphic is what you really need to focus on. We are still in store for a lot of rain starting Friday in the afternoon, going through Saturday, and lasting through most of Sunday. Of course, I'll try to stay on top of these things. This is a fast-moving, fluid system. A lot of moving parts. When you have two systems, that good old Fujiwara, that's your word for the day, effect goes on. A lot of things can happen, so stay tuned and hold on. Fasten your seatbelts. I'll have complete updates on air today. We're going to start doing cuttings at 1 o'clock every hour on the hour through the afternoon to keep you updated on the system. Of course, you can always check my Facebook and Twitter feed. I will keep it updated as much as possible, even when I just wake up from taking a little bit of a nap. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you today starting at 1 o'clock on NBC Charlotte.